Hearings looking into President Clinton's pardons continued Wednesday. The Senate Judiciary Committee heard testimony from current and former Justice Department pardon attorneys and the attorney for financier Mark Rich, Jack Quinn. The hearing, chaired by Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, is 3.5 hours. Following opening statements, the first witness is U.S. pardon attorney Roger Adams.
We'll begin. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing on the pardons granted by President Clinton just before he left office on January 20th, 2001. I would like to thank all of the witnesses who have come here today or who have submitted statements for the record. The pardons and commutations granted by former President Clinton have been the subject of much debate and public commentary. I think virtually everyone who has examined them has been left with some serious questions as to whether some of them were appropriate. Moreover, I think virtually everyone agrees that the pardons given to Mark Rich and Pincus Green were particularly outrageous because they were fugitives who had never taken responsibility for their actions or even appeared in court to challenge them. In fact, the Justice Department had Mr. Rich listed as an international fugitive wanted by the FBI. Moreover, these pardons allegedly were preceded by lavish gifts, political contributions, and pledged donations to the Clinton Presidential Library. As we've come to find out over recent days, Mark Rich and Pincus Green were indicted in the largest tax evasion case in U.S. history. The record is replete with their Stonewall tactics and refusals to produce documents responsive to numerous grand jury subpoenas. Former prosecutors in the case have even described an effort by Mr. Rich and Mr. Green to ship subpoenaed documents out of the country in steamer trunks, a plan which was thwarted by law enforcement after a tip allowed them to stop the airplane with the documents on it before it took off. We've also learned that Mr. Rich's ex-wife, Denise Rich, has donated large sums of money to the Democratic Party, reportedly pledged $450,000 to the Clinton Presidential Library, and gave expensive furniture to the president at the end of his term. These gifts...
Roar over President Bill Clinton's pardons intensified today as congressional investigators focused on Roger Clinton and his efforts to win pardons for friends and associates from his half-brother. In discussions with Bill Clinton, Roger Clinton sought clemency for about 10 people, although he had not been paid for his efforts, said Julia Payne, an aide to the former president. Ms. Payne added that all of the requests had been denied. Congressional officials said they were investigating Roger Clinton's assertions that he had pressed for the pardons without pay. As congressional investigators broadened their inquiry in Washington, federal prosecutors in New York and the Office of United States Attorney Mary Jo White expanded their criminal inquiry to determine whether efforts were made to buy pardons in some cases.
You've been up and down. Now you're sort of settled down. You have, you're married and got a new baby. And
beautiful baby boy.
Has that calmed you down any?
Absolutely.
Has it?
Actually, the calming process, Roger, took place several years ago. I would say 7 or 8 years ago.
When did you do time in jail for drugs? What year?
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you were what, in your late 20s or?
Well, I just turned 39, 30? So I was in my late 20s, yes, sir.
Late 20s when that happened. So you grew up late?
Yes, sir. I absolutely did.
Now, is that because, and let me understand this, your mother was also President Clinton's mother.
Yes, sir.
You had different fathers. His father was killed early when he was very young.
His father was killed before he was born.
Before he was born.
My biological father was Big Brother's father several years before I was born. So that was his daddy. He didn't even know about his biological father until years later in
What did that do
life.
to him when he found out that this guy who he saw roughing up your mother and you kids wasn't really his father? That would make me angry. Did that upset him?
You know, I don't really know, Roger. That's an interesting question. I've never sat down and asked him that point specifically. I know that in my mother's book, it is documented that that Roger Clinton Sr. was the father that Bill loved and the father that Roger Jr. hated. So I don't think it ever did anything to him because he loved Roger.
Why did you hate
Daddy.
him? Why did you hate him?
because I thought he was a mean man. I thought, despite Mother's constantly telling us that he was a good man, just a sick man, that he wasn't a mean or a bad person. He wasn't a bad person, he was just sick. But I couldn't comprehend that. Alcoholism really wasn't discussed, certainly in any depth back then, really. So I tend to think Mother was sort of prophetic.
The official said. While the investigations rapidly accelerated beyond the initial inquiry into Mr. Clinton's pardon of the fugitive commodities trader Mark Rich, Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton told reporters today that she played no role in any of the dozens of pardons that her husband granted. She expressed chagrin that her brother Hugh Rodham accepted a large fee as a pardon lobbyist. In another development, Clinton aides said today that Mrs. Clinton's Senate campaign treasurer helped obtain last-minute pardons for 2 convicted felons from President Clinton. The treasurer, William Cunningham III, a New York lawyer, is the law partner of Harold Ickes, an advisor to the Clintons. In an interview today, Mr. Ickes said a friend came to him in January and asked him to help obtain pardons for James Manning and Robert Fane, who had been convicted in 1982 on tax evasion charges. Mr. Ickes said he told the friend that he was not practicing law and so referred him to Mr. Cunningham, a former assistant United States attorney. A lawyer knowledgeable about the case identified the friend as Harry Thomason, a television producer and Arkansas friend of the Clintons. Mr. Cunningham, who is with the firm of Meyer, Swatsy, English & Klein in Mineola, New York, drew up the paperwork and on January 16 sent it to the pardon office at the Department of Justice. Mr. Ickes' partner at the Washington firm of Ickes and Enright, Janice Enright, sent the pardon applications to the White House, Mr. Ickes said. Mr. Ickes said that he had had no discussions with President Clinton or Mrs. Clinton about the pardons and that he had received no money. He said Mr. Cunningham charged the men on an hourly basis, receiving a total of about $4,000. Roger Clinton's lobbying became known one day after Hugh Rodham, President Clinton's brother-in-law, agreed to return a fee of $400,000 that he had been paid to help 2 men who received a presidential pardon and a grant of clemency on January 20, Mr. Clinton's last day in office. Former White House aides said tonight that Roger Clinton had given the president a list of pardon candidates in 1998 and another list in December or January, when he made a personal appeal to his brother. None of those people received pardons. The pardons, along with expensive gifts that the Clintons took with them as they left office, have clouded Mrs. Clinton's effort to establish herself as the new Democratic senator from New York. Even so, she swept into a Senate office building and coolly responded to reporters' questions. "I was just heartbroken and shocked by it," she said of the payment to her brother. "And immediately said it was a terrible misjudgment and the money had to be returned." Mrs. Clinton suggested that had she known in advance of her brother's lobbying effort, she would have tried to stop it. Congressional investigators have asked Mr. Rodham to explain his role in the successful effort to obtain pardons for Carlos Vignali, a convicted drug dealer, and Almond Glenn Braswell, an herbal supplement marketer convicted of fraud and perjury. Prosecutors for Ms. White, the United States Attorney in New York, are also investigating the pardons. Mr. Rodham's lawyer, Nancy Luque, has said her client did nothing wrong. Today, Sheriff Lee Baca of Los Angeles County issued a statement saying Mr. Rodham telephoned him in January during the effort to obtain a pardon for Mr. Vignali. Sheriff Baca said Mr. Rodham told him that he would soon receive a call from an unidentified staff assistant. When the staff assistant called, the sheriff said he was asked his opinion of Mr. Vignali's father, Carlos Vignali Sr., and whether the pardon should be granted. He said he replied that he was not familiar with the facts of the case. In a letter sent to Roger Clinton today, investigators on the House Government Reform Committee asked whether he had been paid by anyone seeking a pardon or commutation from his half-brother. Specifically, investigators asked whether Roger Clinton had played any role in the pardons and commutations granted to 4 people. They are Mr. Vignali, a California first-time. We hope you found this exploration into the Clinton pardon saga both informative and engaging. If you enjoyed the content, please take a moment to like this video, comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful discussions. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.